The seams were the thing she never let anyone see up close. For 4 years, every stitch in her son's school uniform had come from her own hands, sewn at the kitchen table after the second shift ended, under a lamp she kept low so the light would not wake him. The collar that lay flat against his neck, the cuffs that did not fray, the hem she let down twice as he grew, the small reinforced corners at the pockets where boys put their fists and their stones and their folded notes. All of it was hers. The school sent home a clothing list every August with a store name printed at the bottom, the place where the other mothers bought the blazers and the grey trousers and the white shirts in clean plastic sleeves. And every August Renee folded that list in half and put it in the drawer with a bill she could not pay yet. And then she bought thread. You may already be thinking about a uniform you wore, or one you sewed, or one you wished someone had sewn for you. Hold on to that. This story is going to ask you to remember it. She had no idea that the woman who would notice was watching her son more closely than anyone in that building. She had no idea that the last day would not be the end of anything, but the beginning. Renee Carter was 34 years old, and she cleaned offices at night in a glass tower downtown where she had never once seen the people whose desks she wiped. She wore a grey uniform of her own, the kind the cleaning company issued, and over it she wore a coat she had owned for 9 years. And under all of it she carried the particular tiredness of a woman who slept 4 hours and called it enough. Her son was Malik. He was 7 when the sewing started, and he was 11 now, and he was the reason for every careful stitch, because Malik had been born early and small and had spent the first 2 months of his life in a plastic box with wires taped to his chest, and Renee had made a promise in that hospital that she had never spoken aloud to another person. The promise was simple. Whatever else the world took from him, he would never walk into a room looking like a boy nobody loved. She remembered the hospital in pieces, the way you remember the worst rooms of your life. She remembered the weight of him, which was almost no weight at all, 3 pounds and 1 ounce, a number she would never forget because the nurse had written it on a little card taped to the incubator, and Renee had read it 40 times a day. She remembered the sound the monitors made, the small, steady beeping that meant he was still here, and the silence she dreaded in between. She remembered a night nurse named Carol, who had found her crying in the family room at 2 in the morning and had not said anything useless, had only brought her a cup of weak coffee and sat with her and finally said that you do the next small thing, honey. That is all any of us can do. You just do the next small thing. Renee had held on to that the way she held on to everything that helped. You do the next small thing. For 11 years it had been her whole religion, and the next small thing, once Malik was home and growing and walking out into the world, had turned out to be a needle and a length of thread. The uniform was how she kept the promise. The school was Brightwater Academy, a private school that sat behind a low brick wall on the good side of the city, the kind of school Renee could not have afforded in 1,000 years of double shifts. Malik was there on a scholarship he had earned by being the smartest small boy his old public school had ever tested, and the scholarship covered the tuition and the books and the lunch, and it covered nothing else. It did not cover the uniform. The first week, Renee had stood in the recommended store and turned over a price tag on a single blazer and felt the floor tilt under her because the blazer cost more than her rent, and there were trousers and shirts and a tie besides, and Malik would grow out of all of it inside a year. She put the blazer back on the rack. She walked out. And that night she took the measurements off his small frame with a tape she had bought for $2, and she went looking for grey wool. She found it at a fabric warehouse that sold remnants by the pound. She found navy thread and white thread and the right kind of buttons in a bin near the back. She found a pattern in a book at the library, and she copied it onto newspaper because she could not afford the pattern itself. And then, at the kitchen table, with a machine her own mother had left her, and a seam ripper, and more patience than she knew she had, Renee made her son a blazer that no one at Brightwater Academy would ever guess had not come from a store. It was not easy, and it was not fast. The first blazer took her the better part of 3 weeks, working only in the hours after midnight when the second shift let her go, and she ruined 2 full panels of the grey wool learning how the collar wanted to sit. She remembered the first time she set the sleeve and it puckered all wrong, and she sat at that table at 1 in the morning with the seam ripper, pulling out 40 minutes of work stitch by stitch, her eyes burning, and she remembered telling herself, out loud, in the empty kitchen, the next small thing, just the next small thing. She did the sleeve again. It sat clean the second time. She pressed it flat with the iron and the towel, and she held it up to the lamp, and she turned it in the light. And when she could not find the floor any more, she let herself rest her head on her arms on the table for exactly 5 minutes, and then he started the second sleeve. That was how all of it got made. 5 minutes of rest at a time, traded against a boy's whole sense of himself. The machine her mother had left her was an old steel thing, heavy as an anchor, and it had a particular hum and a particular catch in the bobbin that Renee learned the way you learn a person. When the house was quiet, she could hear it from Malik's room, the steady run of the needle, and more than once Malik woke and padded out and stood in the doorway in his socks, watching his mother sew, not understanding what she was making or why she made it instead of buying it, only knowing that the sound of the machine meant she was close and the night was safe. She would tell him to go back to bed, he would go, and she would thread the next color and keep going. That was the part that mattered to her, that no one would guess. She did not want pity. She had seen what pity did to a child, how it could sit on his shoulders heavier than any coat, and she had decided that Malik would never carry it. So she studied the real uniforms. She noticed the exact shade of grey, the particular blue of the crest the school had embroidered on the breast pocket, and she taught herself to embroider that crest by hand, stitch by stitch, copying it from a photograph until her version was so close that you would have to hold the two side by side in good light to tell them apart. It took her 11 nights to get the crest right the first time. She did it 11 more times over 4 years. Every time he grew, every time a new blazer was needed, every September, every stitch the same. What she did not know was that one person had held the two side by side in good light, one person had noticed, and that person had said nothing for 4 years and had watched and had waited and had her own reasons. Her name was Grace Holloway, and she taught the 5th grade, and she'd been at Brightwater Academy for 19 years. Grace had noticed Malik's blazer in his 2nd week, the year he arrived. She had a tailor's eye inherited from a mother who had sewn for other people's weddings, and the first time Malik raised his hand in her class, she had seen the crest on his pocket and known, instantly, that it was not the machine-made crest the school store sold. The thread was slightly heavier, the stitches were hand-laid, the blue was a shade warmer, mixed by hand to match, rather than ordered from a catalogue. And Grace had felt something move in her chest that she did not have a name for yet, something between recognition and ache, because she knew exactly how many hours sat inside that small blue crest, and she knew that somewhere in this city a person was awake at a table making her son look like he belonged. She never said a word about it. She watched the boy instead. She watched him grow, and every year the blazer grew with him, always the same impossible care in the seams, and Grace came to think of the September arrival of Malik's new blazer the way other people thought of the first frost, a marker of the turning year, a thing she looked for. She graded his papers, which were always the best in the room. She watched him be kind to the slower children. She watched him share his lunch with a boy whose family had hit a hard stretch. Quietly under the table, the way his mother must have taught him to do hard things without letting anyone see. And Grace, who had money, who had married into more of it than she ever spent, began to think. Malik did not know any of this. He knew only that his mother worked nights, that she was tired in a way he was learning to read on her face before she said a word, and that his blazer was his blazer and the other boys' blazers were theirs, and he did not think about it more than that because his mother had done her work so well that there was nothing to think about. He was a boy. He thought about other things. He thought about the science fair and the basketball hoop with no net, and the girl named Tasha who sat 2 rows over, and whether he could ever afford the field trip fee for the planetarium, which he had not told his mother about because he had already decided he would not go. The planetarium fee was $22. The slip had come home in his folder in April, a half-page with a line at the bottom for a parent to sign and a box to check for the money, and Malik had read it on the bus and then folded it small and put it in the bottom of his bag where his mother would not find it. He knew what $22 was in their house. He knew it was the electric bill most of the way paid, or 4 days of groceries if she stretched it. And he had learned, young, to do the arithmetic that children should not have to do. So he made a plan. He would tell Mrs. Holloway he did not feel well that day. He would stay back in the library with the other kid whose family could not pay, quiet boy named Devon, and the two of them would not talk about why they were there, because that was the unspoken agreement between children who understood each other's homes. He had it all worked out. He was good at working things out. It was the same thing his mother did at the table at night, the same arithmetic of want passed down without a word, and neither of them knew the other was doing it. What Malik did not know was that Grace had seen the slip never come back and had quietly paid his fee herself out of her own pocket and had told the office to mark him down as covered and had said nothing to him about it, because she had learned over 19 years that the kindest gift you can give a proud child is one he never has to know he received. So Malik went to the planetarium after all, baffled and relieved. Sure, there had been some mistake in his favor, and he sat under the dome and watched the false stars wheel overhead and forgot, for an hour, the weight of the arithmetic. He told his mother about it that night, the rings of Saturn, the size of the sun, and Renee listened and did not ask how he had paid, because she did not know there had been anything to pay, and the two kindnesses passed in the dark of that kitchen without ever touching. That was the spring of his last year at the lower school. In June, the 5th grade would graduate up to the middle school across the courtyard, and there was a small ceremony for it, and Renee had taken the night off without pay to be there, the first unpaid night she had ever taken, because she would not miss the sight of her son in the blazer she had made walking across that stage. She stayed up the 3 nights before the ceremony, letting out the cuffs one last time. He had grown again. He always grew in the spring. Across town, in a house with more rooms than people, Grace was up late too, but not sewing. She was looking at a folder she had been quietly building for 2 years, and she was making a phone call she had put off for as long as she could. She was deciding, finally, to do the thing she had been deciding to do since the 2nd week of Malik's first year. What she had decided would change everything, though not yet. First there was the last day, and the small, ordinary cruelty that nearly ruined it, and the thing Grace did instead. The morning of the ceremony came up bright and clear. Renee pressed the blazer with an iron on the kitchen table, a towel under it so the wool would not shine, and she pressed the white shirt and she knotted the tie 3 times until it sat right. And Malik stood in the kitchen in the finished uniform, looking, to her eyes, like the answer to a prayer she had been afraid to say out loud. She did not cry. She had a rule about not crying in front of him before something good. She told him he looked sharp. She told him to stand up straight. She walked him to the bus stop and she watched the bus take him, and then she went home and sat at the table where she had done all the sewing, and she put her hand flat on the wood and she let herself feel, for 1 minute, the full weight of 4 years. He had asked her something at the table that morning that she would think about later. He had stood there while she fixed the tie, taller than she remembered him being, his wrists already starting to push past the cuff she had let down twice, and he had asked, not unkindly, just curious, why she did not just buy his blazers like the other mums did, since it seemed like so much work. And Renee had paused with the tie in her hands, and she had thought about all the ways she could answer that the true one and the easy one, and she had chosen the easy one, because the true one was not a weight she wanted to put on an 11-year-old on his graduation day. She had said only that she liked making things and that anybody could buy a thing, but that making it meant it was really his. Malik had accepted that the way children accept the answers that are mostly true. He did not know yet that he would learn the rest of it that very afternoon from a stranger, in front of the whole school. She knotted the tie the 3rd time, and it sat right, and she told him to go catch the bus. Then she got dressed for the ceremony in the one good dress she owned. At the school, the courtyard had been set with folding chairs, and the families came in their bright clothes. And Renee found a seat near the back where she always sat, because the back was where she felt she belonged in rooms like that. She was not the only mother there who had come from a hard place. Yet she was, he felt, the only one who had sewn her son's clothes with her own hands, and she carried that, the way she carried everything, quietly, with her back straight, The trouble started before the ceremony, near the refreshment table, and it started with another mother. The woman's name did not matter, and Renee would not learn it, and that was its own small mercy. She was a mother of one of the other boys, dressed in clothes that cost what Renee made in a month, and she had had a glass of the champagne the school provided, and she was the kind of person who, given a glass of champagne and an audience, found someone to feel superior to. She found Renee. She looked at Renee's dress, which was clean and pressed and 9 years old, and then she looked at Malik standing with the other graduates near the stage, and she said to the woman beside her, but loud enough to carry, that it was nice the school let in charity cases, and that you could always just tell by the little things, the shoes, the bag, the homemade look of it all. Renee heard it. She was meant to hear it. The words landed exactly where they were aimed. And here is what Renee did. She did not turn around. She did not raise her voice. She had spent 34 years learning that there are people whose contempt is the only power they have, and that the worst thing you can do to such a person is let them see that it did not reach you. So she looked at her son across the courtyard, and she found her back, and she kept it straight. And she did not give that woman 1 inch of the satisfaction she had come for. Still, something behind Renee's ribs had cracked just slightly, a hairline thing, because the woman had said homemade like it was a disease, and homemade was the holiest word Renee knew. Homemade was 11 nights on a single crest. Homemade was the promise she made in a hospital. Homemade was love with the receipts torn up, so the boy would never have to know the cost. She was still sitting very straight with that hairline crack behind her ribs when Grace Holloway walked up to the front of the courtyard and asked if she might say a few words before the ceremony began. This was not on the program. The headmaster looked surprised. Grace had 19 years at that school and a quiet authority that came from all of them, and the headmaster gestured to the small podium, and Grace stepped up to it, and the courtyard went still in the way courtyards do when someone unscheduled begins to speak. Grace did not look at the woman who had said the cruel thing. She did not need to. She had heard it too. And she had decided, in the space of a breath, to answer it without ever naming it, in the only language that would matter. She said she wanted to talk about a uniform. She said that 19 years of teaching had taught her to read children, but that the deepest thing she knew about her students, she had not learned from their faces or their papers. She had learned them from the small evidence the children carried without knowing they carried it. And she said that 4 years ago a boy had walked into her classroom in a blazer, and that she had a tailor's eye, her mother's eye, and that she had seen at once that the crest on that blazer's pocket had not come from any store. A murmur went through the courtyard. Renee, in the back, went very still. Grace said that the crest had been embroidered by hand, that the blue thread had been mixed by hand to match the school's blue because no catalogue sold that exact shade, and that whoever had done it had gotten it so close that she had taken the school store's blazer and held it next to the boy's in the window light, just to be sure, and even then she had needed the sun on both of them to tell. She said she had counted the stitches once when the boy left his blazer on his chair at recess, and that there were over 400 of them in that one small crest, each one laid by a human hand, and that the same hand had done it again every year as the boy grew, 4 blazers, 4 crests, 4 years, and that she had watched for the new blazer every September, the way you watch for something you love. Renee's hand had risen to her mouth without her deciding to lift it. Grace said that she had spent 19 years in a school full of advantages, surrounded by children who had everything bought for them, and that she had learned that you cannot buy the thing that was in those stitches. You cannot order it from a catalogue. It does not come in a plastic sleeve. She said that what was in that blazer was a mother awake at a table while the city slept, deciding that her son would walk into the most advantaged room in this city, looking like he belonged there, and doing it not with money, which she did not have, but with her own 2 hands and 400 stitches and 4 years of nights. The courtyard was silent now. The woman with the champagne had set her glass down, and Grace said that she would not embarrass anyone by pointing. She said the mother who had done this knew who she was, and the boy knew, and now all of them knew. And that was enough. She said only this. That in 19 years she had handed out a great many awards to children for the things money and tutors could give them, and that today, on this last day, she wanted to honor the one thing in that whole school that no money had touched. She wanted to honor the work of a pair of hands. Then she looked for the first time toward the back of the courtyard and she found Renee's face, and she did not say her name because she had promised herself she would protect the woman's dignity even in the act of lifting it up, and she simply inclined her head, one mother of sewing to another, one keeper of hands to another, and she said, "Thank you." Renee was weeping by then, silently the way she did everything, but she was sitting up straight, and her son was looking at her across the whole length of that courtyard with an expression she would remember until the day she died, because Malik had understood, all at once, what his blazer had cost and what his mother had never told him. And he was not ashamed, he was something the opposite of ashamed, something there is not a clean word for, and he was crossing the courtyard toward her before the ceremony had even begun. He reached her and he put his arms around her in front of everyone, this boy who was getting too old for that, and he pressed his face into her shoulder against the blazer she had pressed that morning, and he said, quietly, just for her, that he knew now, and that he had the best one, and that he would always have the best one. That was the part Grace had not planned and could not have planned, and it was the part that undid the whole courtyard, because there is no defense against a child who has just understood his mother. Grace was not finished, though, and the part that was still coming was the part she had been building toward for 2 years. After the ceremony, when the chairs were folding and the families were drifting toward their cars, Grace found Renee near the gate and asked if they could speak. Renee, who had spent the last hour trying to put her face back together, braced herself, because in her experience a person of Grace's standing, pulling her aside meant a problem, a fee. She had missed a form she had not signed. That was the reflex 4 years of being the scholarship mother had built into her. She said yes, of course, and she waited for the bill. There was no bill. Grace asked her, instead, what she did, and Renee told her the truth, that she cleaned offices at night, and Grace nodded as if she had already known, and then Grace told her the thing she had spent 2 years arranging. Grace's late husband had built a company that made school uniforms, of all things, the very industry that had priced Renee out of that store on the first week. The company had a workshop and a design floor and 40 employees, and when Grace's husband had died 3 years before, the company had come to her and she had kept it running, but at arm's length, the way you keep a thing that reminds you of someone, and she had been looking for 2 years for a person to run the design and quality floor. Not a manager who could read a spreadsheet, those she could hire in a day. She had been looking for a person who understood, in their hands, what a uniform was for, what it meant to a child to wear one that fit, what it meant to a mother to make one. She had found that person in the second week of Malik's first year, and she had spent 4 years being sure, and she was sure. She offered Renee the job. A real job, with a real salary, with daylight hours and health insurance and a chair at a table where her opinion would shape what tens of thousands of children wore to school, and she said that the first thing she wanted Renee to fix was the price, because she had been sick about that price for 2 years. Ever since she had understood that it was the kind of price that sent mothers home to sew by hand, she wanted a line of uniforms that a scholarship covered. She wanted Renee to build it. Renee did not have words for a moment. She stood at the gate of the school she could not afford, in the dress she had owned for 9 years, and she understood that the 4 years of nights had not been invisible after all, that someone had seen every stitch, that the world had a longer memory than she had ever dared to believe. And she said, yes. And then she could not say anything else. And Grace took her hand and held it, and the two of them stood there at the gate, while the courtyard emptied, 2 women who knew what a pair of hands was worth. Malik watched from a few feet away, the strap of his bag over his shoulder, his blazer still on, though the day had warmed, because he was not ready to take it off, and he understood, in the way children understand things before they have the words, that something enormous had just shifted under his family's feet, and that it had shifted because of a thing his mother did at a table at night when she thought no one in the world could see. Have you ever done a quiet, faithful thing for years, sure that no one noticed? Stay with this a moment longer. The noticing comes when you have stopped waiting for it. The first day of Renee's new job came 2 weeks later. She walked into the workshop in the morning light, real morning light, the kind she had only ever cleaned around at night, and the floor manager showed her to a table that was hers, with a machine that was hers, better than any she had owned, and a window beside it that looked out on the street. She sat down at it. She put her hand flat on the wood, the way she had at a kitchen table the morning of the ceremony, and she felt the same weight, but it had turned over inside her, the way grief turns to grace if you carry it long enough, and what had been 4 years of solitary nights was now a thing she would be paid to do in the daylight for other people's children, so that fewer mothers would have to do it alone. The floor manager was a broad, careful man named Theo, who had run the cutting line for 20 years and had been told by Grace that the new woman knew uniforms in her hands, and Theo, who had heard that kind of thing before about people who turned out to know nothing, had decided to reserve his judgment. He gave Renee a blazer off the line and asked her plainly to tell him what she saw. She turned it over. She ran her thumb along the inside of the collar and along the seam at the shoulder, and she was quiet for a moment. And then she said that the collar was fine, but the shoulder seam was laid a half-inch too far forward, which would pull when a child raised his hand, and that a child raised his hand all day, and that no boy should have to think about his blazer when he was trying to be brave enough to answer a question. Theo looked at the seam. Then he looked at her for a long moment, a different look than the one he had walked over with, and he said, "Well..." And then he said, "All right, then," and that was the whole of it. And from that morning on, Theo never once reserved his judgment about Renee again. The salary changed things quickly and then slowly. The first month, she paid every bill in the drawer, the whole folded stack of them, and she took the recommended store clothing list out from under them, and she looked at it for a long time, and then she did not throw it away. She kept it. She pinned it to the board above her new table at the workshop, the old store's price at the bottom, as a reminder of the exact thing she was there to undo. By the fall, the line she had designed was in production, a full uniform a scholarship could cover. The crest machine-made but laid in the warmer blue she had mixed by hand 4 years running, because she had insisted on that blue, and Grace had laughed and said, of course that blue, that was the whole point. Mothers across the city bought those uniforms that autumn without ever knowing that the blue of the crest had been matched at a kitchen table by a woman sewing for a son in a plastic box of a promise. The children knew the uniforms fit. The children knew they were warm. And somewhere in that, Renee felt, the 4 years had been paid back, with interest she had never asked for. Malik moved up to the middle school in his store-bought blazer that fall, the first one his mother had not made, and he kept the last hand-sewn one in his closet on a hanger, and he did not let her give it away. He said it was his. He said it the way you say a thing you have decided about forever. And on the nights when Renee came home now, at a normal hour, with the light still in the sky, she would sometimes find him at the kitchen table doing his homework under the same low lamp, in the same chair where she had sewn, and the sight of him there, at that table, in that light, with no wires on his chest and no contempt able to reach him, and the whole long road behind them was the thing she had been sewing toward, without knowing it, for 4 years. She kept her own machine too, her mother's machine, the one that had made all 4 blazers. She did not need it any more for uniforms. She found, though, that she could not stop sewing entirely, and so, on her own evenings, she began to make small things for the other scholarship children at Brightwater, a hem let down, a button replaced, a coat lining repaired, quietly, the way she did everything, the way she had taught her son to do hard things without letting anyone see. Grace heard about it eventually, because Grace heard about most things, and she did not say anything to Renee directly. She only made sure, the following year, that there was a small fund at the school for exactly that kind of quiet repair, and she named it nothing, put no plaque on it, because she knew the woman it honoured would have wanted it kept plain. The last hand-sewn blazer stayed on its hanger in Malik's closet for years. He took it with him when he left for college on a full scholarship, the kind that covers everything this time, and he hung it in his dorm closet where his roommates asked about it once, and he told them only that his mother made it, and that there were over 400 stitches in the crest, and that he had counted them himself one night when he was 12, sitting at a kitchen table under a low lamp to know exactly what he had been given. Renee was at his graduation. She wore a new dress, but not because the old one shamed her. She had simply decided that a day like that deserved one, and she could buy it now without the floor tilting. Grace was there too, older, slower, retired from the school by then, but never from Renee's life. The two of them long past employer and employee into the thing that grows in the place where one person sees another person fully and refuses to look away. They sat together. They watched Malik walk across a far larger stage than the one in that courtyard, in a cap and gown over a shirt his mother had pressed that morning, because some things she would always do, and Renee put her hand flat on the program in her lap, the way she put her hand flat on every surface that had ever held the weight of something true. And she felt the 4 years again, and all the years after them, and she did not cry this time because she had learned that some joys are too large for tears, and ask instead only that you sit very straight inside them and let them be real. After the ceremony, Malik found them in the crowd the way he had found his mother across that first courtyard, unerringly, like a needle finding the one true line of a seam. He hugged Grace first because he had been raised to honor the people who had lifted his mother. Then he turned to Renee, and he did not say anything clever, and he did not make a speech. He just took her hands, both of them, the hands that had made his childhood look loved, and he held them up between them and looked at them, really looked at them, the way Grace had looked at a small blue crest in the window light 19 years into her own life of noticing. And he said the only thing there was to say, which was thank you. And which was enough, because it always had been. He had a daughter himself, years on from that day, a small girl, born healthy and on time and into a house with the bills paid. And when she was old enough for school, Malik bought her uniforms from a store, the good kind, the kind his mother now helped design, with the crest laid in the warmer blue. The night before her first day, though, he sat down at his own kitchen table, under a lamp he kept low, with his grandmother's old steel machine that his mother had passed to him, and he sewed his daughter's name into the inside of her collar by hand, in small, careful stitches, navy thread on white, so that the first thing against her neck every morning would be the proof that someone had stayed up to think of her. He was not as good at it as his mother. The letters were a little crooked. He did it anyway. He had learned at a kitchen table under a low lamp exactly what such a thing was worth. She had made him a uniform by hand for 4 years, so that no one would ever know how little they had. In the end, everyone knew. And it turned out to be the richest thing about them. If this story sat with you, take a second and tell me about the quiet, faithful thing someone did for you, the thing they thought you never noticed. And if you want another story about the long memory of a kindness, the unseen work that comes back to find the person who did it, stay with me. There is always another one.